Welcome to another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. You're listening to a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State, featuring writer, poet, and musician Rick Pidcock. Now here's Rick.
By now you've probably heard the audio clips from CNN's trip to Moscow, Idaho to interview the leaders of Doug Wilson's Christ Church.
I'd like to see the town be a Christian town. I'd like to see the state be a Christian state. I'd like to see the nation be a Christian nation. I'd like to see the world be a Christian world. So every society is theocratic. The only question is who's theo? In a secular democracy, it would be demos, the people. In a Christian republic, it'd be Christ. Women are the kind of people that people come out of.
In my ideal society, we would vote as households. And I would ordinarily be the one that would cast the vote, but I would cast the vote having discussed it with my household.
And there were also people who owned slaves who were decent human beings and didn't mistreat them. Exiling homosexuals, and the scripture praises both men for doing that, which means that the requirement for the death penalty that does exist in Leviticus, that requirement was not a minimum penalty, but was a maximum penalty, because Scripture praises the kings who didn't execute the homosexuals. They just shut the orgy down. They just shut the party down. So there is latitude in the application of biblical law. There is latitude in how it's applied. When I first began ministering as a Christian minister, I was grown, an adult, and preaching the gospel. Sodomy was a felony in all 50 states.
The clips have garnered a lot of reaction over the past week, especially since Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth reposted the interview along with the words, "All of Christ for all of life." And Wilson is loving all of the coverage.
He didn't just repost it like, oh, here's an interesting thing that these weird people are doing. He reposted it, and he himself said, "All of Christ for all of life," which is the tagline that we use. So he was, in effect, reposting it and saying amen at some level. This is the first time we've had connections with as many people in national government as we do now. But this is not an ecclesiastical lobbying effort where we're trying to meet important people. We're trying to give some of these people an opportunity to meet with God.
CNN's coverage came as Wilson's biggest recruiting conference, ironically known as Grace Agenda, was set to begin. But CNN wasn't the only media in town to cover Wilson. The Sons of Patriarchy podcast decided to host a live event during Grace Agenda in order to meet with and amplify the voices of those Wilson and his band of unmarried men have harmed. It's a podcast that not only explores the theology and politics of Wilson and Christ Church, but that does so by centering the perspectives of those Wilson and his men have abused. Peter Bell, who started the podcast, appeared on stage alongside Sarah Stankorb, a journalist and the author of Disobedient Women, as well as the upcoming book, Damned If She Does, Why Women Quit Church and What It Means for the Future of Religion.
Well, welcome to the Kenworthy Performing Arts Center for our live recording and Q&A of Sons of Patriarchy. Thank you, everyone, also, for making this a sellout. We sold out in 2 days.
While CNN's coverage has brought much-needed attention to some of the supremacist ideas Wilson promotes, it also has led to questions about how Wilson should be covered by the media. After all, if Wilson is excited about the coverage and can use it as a recruiting tool, then how are the people under the boot of Wilson being liberated and affirmed? What might it look like for the media to cover these men in a way that unearths the theological rot that drives Wilson's quest for power, that reveals the fullest extent of the harm he causes to racial and ethnic minorities, women, children, and LGBTQ people, and that centers and amplifies the concerns of those he's harmed? To explore how we in the media should cover these men, I sat down for an interview with Sarah Stankorb and Peter Bell to discuss their reflections on their weekend in Moscow. So to start us off with, Peter, maybe you could give us some information on what the event you put on was all about and how you felt it went.
Yeah, we've been planning this event for months. and it was a live recording and Q&A with me and Sarah Stankorb, who's also on this call with you, and she'll talk about kind of her portion too, as well as some of her coverage. But it was all about her upcoming book, her research into Doug Wilson, into abuse, into Christian nationalism and patriarchy, and then my work with Sons of Patriarchy, the people we've interviewed, the topics we've discussed, and then a Q&A with a resident. So I should say too, this is at the Kenworthy, which is a theater in downtown Moscow. It's like a historic theater. I think it's the only theater in downtown, if not one of the bigger theaters in Moscow. Moscow being kind of headquarters for Doug Wilson and all things related to Doug Wilson. And we planned it deliberately to fall right in line with Doug Wilson's Grace Agenda, which is their kind of official conference slash get together of all things patriarchs and those who are considering moving to Moscow. And I actually talked to Doug about this personally and had him describe it to me. And it's kind of their time to show people what they're about and the glories of living as a patriarch in Moscow. So that's a little bit about our event, and we figured who better to join us than Sarah, who wrote Disobedient Woman, and then that Vice article, as people have been saying more
Yeah.
recently. So yeah, that was kind of the goal and the intent, and then we sold it out. Our official count was somewhere around 300, which was the theater seats 280. So we had standing room, and which was pretty wild. So that was fun.
And then you guys had some time to hang out with people afterwards.
Yeah, yeah. Sarah, if you want to talk about that too, because they were there to hang out with you, less so me.
Well, and actually, this isn't necessarily of interest for the article, but a woman messaged me and said, "Why did you never show up?" And I did. Her pictures of me. I changed outfits though because I knew I'd be sweaty up on stage, so maybe I was camouflaged.
That's
I
true.
don't know.
Yeah.
Um, so after the event, we kind of had like an after party. We had originally, or Peter, not we, Peter had organized to have this outside location because it looked like we might need an overflow site because there was just so much interest. And instead, it sort of turned into an after party where we got to talk to community members about just what it's like, and I personally talked to a range of people, some survivors from Christchurch, some who one woman just moved to the community and was kind of like, what is happening here? Talked to a couple of teachers who are seeing kids, young adults from the university getting recruited into Christchurch. So it was, for me, fascinating to be around people who are living with what I think nationally we can see Christian nationalism as this ideology that's kind of sweeping through. But for people in communities like Moscow, it is real and it is every day. And so we had that, and it was just also like nice to meet people. People brought their books, I signed them. So it was in some ways a lot like other book signings because Disobedient Women discusses abuse within the church very frankly. I often meet people who some have never told anyone, some have only told a trusted few people what they've been through. But at every event with a book, I hear from someone who's been through hell
Hmm.
and wants to tell me.
Yeah. And that's one thing I thought was really interesting about your coverage of the event was that you guys intermingled with those who have felt the weight of this.
Hmm.
And I don't know if it happened right as you were on the plane or just before you were there, but CNN released an interview with
Yeah,
Wilson.
we're aware.
Yeah, and so like,
Yeah.
and then Pete Hegseth posted the interview along with the statement, "All of Christ for all of life." And now I wasn't there, so maybe CNN had a after party with like where they were listening to who would be considered Moscow's least of these. I'm going to take an educated guess that they didn't. But I'm curious. I know, Sarah, you've made some comments about the CNN coverage. Like, how do you
Mhm.
think they have covered it? Maybe even just more generally, the mainstream media, how they've covered Wilson, and how do you think it lines up with how you think Wilson should be covered?
I definitely
You're
have
about to get an
thoughts.
earful from Sarah.
So I'll say that it's the same mistake. And like I am part of mainstream media, so like I'm throwing stones at my own glass house. But I'm a freelancer, like, it's different than being like an on-air personality. And I will just say, like, it is the same mistake that CNN and similar channels have made when reporting on Trump. It's offering these tantalizing tidbits that are easily made into memes, and then it creates a bigger platform. Like the Canon Press accounts have been thrilled with the coverage. There were, I heard secondhand that, the guys, Chocolate Knox, whoever, was at the local coffee shop bragging about the CNN coverage. This is not this is not bad for them. This is not a scandal for them. This is a megaphone for them. Some folks I saw online say, "Oh, he said the quiet part loud," and I get what they're saying. Some folks feel as if this has been the current in evangelicalism for years. Now here comes Wilson and Sumner blabbing about it. But no, this is exactly what they want the platform to say. This is what they believe. And then to just drop it and think that their position that women in a Christian society should not be able to vote, that's it. That is not the worst of it. And now, like, listen, I'm getting hot here. I'm getting heated, but for years now, people, me and Peter, have been reporting and sharing stories of what actually happens to women in these patriarchal groups, what happens to queer people in these patriarchal groups, how anyone on the outside is viewed within these groups. It is so much bigger than a retrograde perspective on women's suffrage. It is real and it's happening every day. And if you're going to create a platform for this nonsense, it is irresponsible not to show the consequences because then you're helping it grow. You're helping their voice reach those people who didn't know they had allies who also believe so deeply in patriarchy. And so what you will impact is their family, is their church. And I just,
Yeah. I'll add and color into some of that stuff too. Because we're connected with so many people on the ground in Moscow and Sarah as well. We have some of the like background information on this, and we can't share too much about what CNN could and couldn't cover. We had heard from
I don't
residents.
know about this.
Yeah,
What, you've got
the
your own.
CNN, yeah, supposedly they had asked harder questions, but either it didn't get past legal or they weren't sure about it or whatever it was, but they also couldn't get some of the local people to talk because the local people, as Sarah knows, are really, really, really hesitant to talk to legacy media because legacy media tends to come in, drop into Moscow, leave, sell a really quick story, get national headlines, get clicks, get ad revenue, and then start their own little podcast series or whatever it is. And so local residents are either unavailable, unresponsive, or actively hostile to talking to them because they know if they just drop in, do media coverage, that like Sarah said, the movement gets a lot more popular, but the people whom the movement most directly affects they get pounded for the next few weeks or months. So most local people there, and you'll see in Tennessee and other kind of hot spots in Texas, North Carolina, Arkansas now, are really, really hesitant to talk to media who has like the most basic understanding, very, very surface level understanding. And they're like, oh, cool, there's a story about these crazy Christian nationalists in Moscow. Let's go talk to them. And local residents are like, you're going to make my life worse over the next few
Hmm.
weeks. I'm not going to talk to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just like as a side note to this, something else that I did, someone, I'm forgetting who, someone told me is that just given the bombardment of press
Yeah.
after the murders,
Yep. Yeah.
there's
The
like,
Kohlberger murders in Moscow. Yeah.
yeah,
That was a whole different
and
thing.
on top of all of that, just an even bigger mistrust.
Yeah.
That makes sense. It seems to me like the mainstream media, like they're latching onto a few extremist quotes, um, but they're not really interested in getting into the dirt and
Yeah.
and like doing a
Or they
deep
are, they don't know what they're working with when they get to the
yeah,
dirt.
like they're not really interested in doing a deep dive into the theology that produces the fruit of those quotes.
Yeah.
They'll point out how extremist it is to want to overturn the 19th Amendment, but they're not. But like, are they really interested in analyzing and rooting out the theology of patriarchy underneath it
Yeah.
all?
Yeah, yeah, which like
No.
Sarah said, because that they'll say we want to repeal the 19th, and what the media, so they'll see that quote or they'll see that tagline, repeal the 19th, and they'll say they want to take away the woman's vote, which isn't technically what Doug said. He said we want household voting.
Hmm.
And so when you get
Yeah.
to Doug, he'll like, well, that's not what we said. So they're just misinterpreting us. They're misinformed. We're going to household voting where the woman's going to agree with her husband on how to vote. So we're not taking away the wife's vote. We're going with household voting and making sure the house is united under their vote. So it's they'll catch those headlines and then Moscow will pounce and say that's not what we said, which technically that's true. That's not exactly what they said.
Mhm.
And they even said like, "Oh, we'll have a conversation with my wife." But when
Yeah,
it's a relationship where the wife has to submit to the husband's headship, then it's not much of a
precisely.
conversation.
Yep, precisely.
Yes. Yes.
So it's very frustrating for me because like takes the some of the theology like whether Jesus is God or resurrected from the dead, a lot of those are matters of faith. And so I'm not going to like belittle people one way or the other about how they think about that. But like what to me is undeniable is that the Bible was written by a community of people on the underside of empire. And Jesus was essentially a king whose throne was a cross and who talked about his brothers and sisters being the least of these. And yet, the entire theological narrative of Wilson and Hegseth and these Theobros ignores all of that. And it basically turns Jesus and his followers into a bigger version of Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, and Rome.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. You might know Nijay Gupta,
Yes.
who wrote Strange Religion, and he's done some stuff on the early church and just how. And I was telling Sarah, and actually the crowd that was there. So I'm a I guess you can consider an evangelical Christian, although I'm not evangelical in the political sense. I'd be more kind of old school evangelical, maybe like British evangelical, closer to that, where I'm more progressive politically and more conservative, I guess you could say theologically. Although I hate using those terms because they've been co-opted in many respects. But yeah, it's the religion grew because it was anti everything that Christian nationalism is today, where they were those who came to the help of the poor, to the needy, to the widow, to the fatherless, instead of those who came to oppress those, as well as bringing the refugees, the immigrants, even like Doug Wilson's favorite theologian, one of his favorite theologians, John Calvin, has a pen name, a pseudonym from the 16th century. He was one of the foremost, I don't know the word, like takers in. He had a refugee camp for French Huguenots who were being persecuted by the Catholic Church. And he brought in a lot of refugees. I forget. I think it's Charles Desperville. It's English people will call it Desperville, but Charles Desperville. But you never hear about some of this stuff from them because it doesn't kind of like fit their narrative. And Calvin said some bad stuff and some wonky stuff. but it's yeah, they'll zero in on some aspects of historical Christianity, but then not at other aspects of historical Christianity, and say, hey, these are the people, or like Martin Luther King Jr. being an Orthodox Christian, more or less, C.S. Lewis and other people who've fought a good fight, but that doesn't fit their narrative for power.
Yeah. And this came up during the event.
Yeah.
So Peter very kindly has me talking about a book that I'm just finishing. I probably can't. It's on my floor. Like I'm still finishing
Yeah.
it. Um, but I've been talking to women about why they're leaving the church. And like millions of women over the last decade have left the church. And many are finding other types of spirituality, some are atheist, some are agnostic. But a large portion of these women told me they are leaving the church because they believe in Jesus. They were taught about this figure of Jesus who took care of the poor, like took care of the outcasts, all of the things you described. And the church isn't doing that anymore. It's because of the faith that they had instilled in them in this figure who loved the downtrodden that they can't be in the church anymore. And that, like, when we talked about that, I mean, this, I don't know if you listened to the live stream, but
Hmm.
who people responded like that. That definitely resonated with the crowd there.
Yeah, because like for me, it's like when I led worship, one of my favorite songs to lead had this line that said, "Your blood speaks a better word than all the empty claims I've heard upon this earth."
Hmm.
And for me, like I have to look at Christianity today, and I'm like, or particular versions of it, because there's a lot of variety there. But I'm like, does your good news, does your gospel actually speak a better word than the word of empire? And when I look at the word that Wilson and Hegseth and these men promote, it's all about power over your neighbors. And the people in the Hebrew Bible who are being dragged away from their families to Babylon, they would not recognize this. In fact, if they were to listen to Wilson and Hegseth and see their tattoos and all of their stuff, they would see them as Babylon.
They would. Yeah, and I mean, welcome. I mean, you, Rick, you would know this too, and I'm sure Sarah as well. But welcome to the prophets of Israel. That's essentially the entirety of their message is Israel. You are taking on quote unquote the pagan nations. You're the ones who are oppressing your own people. You're oppressing other people. You are not following the precise law that God had given on the mount, which they like taking little bits and pieces of this out of context and saying like, "Hey, you better follow this," or a man or a woman shall not take on the garments of a man, or a man shall not lie with somebody else, or the slavery text, quote unquote, but not look at some of these things in context, which has been my goal with this stuff, which I'm still a Christian and I'm trying to separate some of this stuff and say, hey, this is not core to our faith. In fact, it's the very opposite of our faith. If you look at the whole of this, and yeah, there are some problematic texts that we have to work through. We can't turn a blind eye to those. But if you look at the message as a whole, it's relatively liberative.
Mhm.
It's not far off from what I see, like liberation theology in Latin America, or what you see within kind of historic African American Christianity as well. Some of those get a lot closer to the truth than the lens that I think a lot of us are used to.
Yeah. Yeah, I would rather be present among those who are suffering and than among those who are using theology to cause the suffering.
Yeah.
Like James Cone talks about, like he believed that God willed the slaves' liberation,
Hmm.
whereas the slave owners believed God willed their slavery.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. The curse
so,
of Ham. Yep.
yeah, and so I think I appreciate how you guys, got in there and met with people on the ground and have listened to their stories. One of the things I've felt in all of this is there's relief that people are finally talking about Wilson, but there's also part of me that's like, okay, where have you been all this time? Like, why couldn't we have taken this more seriously before the election? So like as people are starting to cover Wilson more, how do you process through your desire to invite more people into the conversation and concern while also not getting fed up that it's taken this long for people to finally hear what you've been saying for a long time?
I mean, so especially through socials, but like I'm getting emails from people, the survivors, especially the outspoken survivors. I cannot fathom what they're going through. Like they tooth and nail got clawed their way out, and then were generous enough to offer warnings to the rest of us that were not heeded. I mean, I know I'm frustrated. Like I keep posting the story from 2021. Like this was on the internet. Y'all could have read it. And the book was 2 years ago. Like I feel like I am not religious anymore, but there is a degree to which maybe I'm understanding the frustration that I used to read in the voice of the prophets, who are like, tell them the truth and no one's listening. It's the way of things. Sometimes it takes a tipping point. Sometimes things have to be just so bad in order to force a populace to look around and wonder, how did we get here? And if that's where we are, I think it's on our shoulders to get as much clear, concise information out there so that people who never knew about this before can understand. I mean, that's option A. Option B is screaming into a pillow. So I'm trying to do what I can to keep get information out. But yeah, it's very, very frustrating.
Yeah, I know for
And
me, for like the last, I felt that's very similar the last few months. Like when something happens with JD Vance or something happens with Trump or Doug Wilson, I'm like, here are my five JD Vance articles from the last 3 years, people. Like, it's like
yeah.
you simultaneously want to
Yep.
offer some new information, offer some,
Yeah.
hey, here's the information, but also like this was dated in 2022.
Well, and then
Yeah.
there's also it's just the cover. I mean, like this is part of the shrinking of journalism as a whole. The folks covering religion don't necessarily always have a background in religion, and
Hmm.
so they don't know what they're missing. They don't know what questions
Yeah.
to ask.
And
And
they they sort of look like fools in the process, which is unfortunate because they've got obviously media attention. They've got. I mean, CNN's now got the nation's attention with this. And yeah, there were some things that she missed, but a lot of it too was it was other Christians who were like, well, this is just basic Christian doctrine, which isn't necessarily true for a lot of this, but some just it's hard coming from a religious person, from a Christian perspective, and looking at this and saying, I just wish there was a more robust understanding of some of these topics, like Sarah said. But again, it's just when you got a hot topic, everyone wants to share in the pie, and that just makes the pie even hotter.
Yeah.
well, and like as fun as it is to blame media, like Wilson wouldn't be where Wilson is today
Yep. Without
if
Christians.
without the Christians who
Yep.
platformed him and like
Yep.
maybe sometimes treated him like a crazy uncle, but then still put him online
Yeah.
alongside themselves.
Yep. He was the crazy uncle who had I mean the things I kept on hearing, and I mean I've known Doug's name for 10-ish years, maybe a little bit longer than that, since my time with Driscoll. But those who would look at Wilson say, yeah, he's a little strange theologically. He's a little wonky on some of his political views, but like culturally, he's super solid. He's got some great stuff to say about the family. He's got some great stuff to say about education. Because Doug's been very well known in education for a long time, even before this stuff, and that stuff just gets missed.
Hmm.
Now, I guess with Hegseth in the national conversation, his views on education and military are now finally bringing some of this stuff up, but it's not like it hasn't been available for a really long time. But like Sarah said, because the Christians didn't take it seriously, I think media didn't take it seriously. If Christians had taken it seriously in some way, maybe there would have been a little bit more understanding or more direct focus on some of this stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, like Rachel Held Evans,
Yeah.
she called him out, but John Piper, like you compare her,
Hmm.
who people are willing to listen to.
In the
Yeah.
Gospel Coalition.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
So like I know a lot of conservatives who will vote Republican because that's just what they think they have to do, typically due to abortion or LGBTQ issues. But like when I bring up statements from Wilson or those like him about things like overturning the 19th Amendment, some of these extremist things that the mainstream media will latch onto, setting up a theocracy, these Republicans will often tell me that I'm overreacting, that these men will never really be able to achieve these things. And then if I keep pressing them on it, they'll actually end up viewing me as the extremist. And so I'm curious, like, how do you respond to the idea that we're just overreacting and that we're the extremists for taking Wilson so seriously?
Yes, everyone, if you want to start off on this one.
Like, come on. He's growing. Like the number of CREC churches is growing. The number of kids enrolled in classical Christian education and whose families may or may not know his connection to Wilson. It's growing. Wilson spoken what is it, NatCon. He never got an invitation there before. He's got this church plant in DC. He's got Hegseth. He's building connections in a way in political spheres that he hasn't had the opportunity to do before. And then even if our national leaders are not in Wilson's camp, there's this interest in Christian nationalism that can make folks be willing allies. And sometimes that's all you need. And especially within evangelicalism, having someone who's willing to help platform you and willing to give you an ear and willing to hear you out, that can be enough to spread the word. Um, I just, I, I don't take that critique seriously enough to respond more than that.
I'll maybe provide some, not context, but some to distinguish. I think the stuff that I've been learning, and maybe Sarah's with me on this or not, who knows? Maybe this is just my opinion. I think there's a difference between well thought out legislation and overturn, like something that's deeply thought through, something that's well put together, something that has legs, can stand on itself. And then there's being loud. And what I see, and again, I'm not a political expert by any means, and I told the crowd that it's what I see is I see loud, and loud gets attention, and loud becomes more popular, and that has overshadowed like some of their ideas are just really poor. Not just on the face value of it, but how to implement them legislatively. There's very little understanding, which is why you see some of the infighting and some of this group, some of the fracturing. That doesn't mean they're not incredibly influential and can't become even more influential, but I distinguish between being very influential and being well informed.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like even if they can't go to certain places legislatively, they can still shape the culture.
Hmm.
And that's something that I've tried to be encouraging to those of us who are calling some of this out. Like it feels like we have very little legislative power right now. Even like every part of the government is controlled basically by these guys. And yet like we can still do what we can to speak to the fear, the control, the theology that is motivating some of these people. And if we can like plant some questions and some curiosity in people for what the humanity of those on the underside, then maybe we do have a power to be shaping the culture in an alternative way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's just knowing the movement inside and out. It's not like Sarah said, burying your head in the sand and saying, I'm just going to wait this out, or I'm just going to smack talk them or talk them down, or produce media against them, which there's room for all of that stuff. But understanding them deeply is somewhere where I think this starts, and then moving on to, hey, now let's critique, now let's push back, but only not until, but as you move towards making this stuff better known, like you got to know this inside and out in order for you to really make a really informed critique. That doesn't mean you can't move towards that along that way. It's not like and until you do this, then you can go for it. You just got to know it inside and out.
Yeah.
And I think also, just speaking in terms of like Wilson and other high control problematic movements, we're at this moment where, because this has been cycling for so long, there are so many people out there who have personal experience, who have survived it themselves. They have access to TikTok, they have access to Instagram. So if you have reporters who are able to get information out there, then they can echo and help spread the word, like their friends or family know they've been through this. And I think that's also a way of just moving the populace, is this information's been out there enough that I would hope, like, yeah, shiny happy people, all these docu-series people keep eating up. Sooner or later, I hope the general population will realize, like, there are dots connecting all of these things,
Yeah.
and a lot of it is abuse of power.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's connecting the media arm with those on the ground, which is what we were trying to do in Moscow. It's we have connections with these people. We have some of the platform, and we can help connect them with the platform. But it's when you have the platform without the voices, the platform just amplifies the people that they're reporting on. But if you have the platform with the voices, then you've got some not power in the same sense, but you've got something to fight with.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So to wrap this up, like now that people are interested in Wilson, like what's the path forward? What are you working on to continue exposing what they're doing? Are there any future events? How effective do you think these are going to be?
Yeah, that's. I'll start off with this, then Sarah, you go on the reporting thing. I'll be very clear. I'm not a reporter, so I'm not somebody who's trained in asking questions or trying to investigate. Although I try to do that as well as I can. My thing is I'm a fan of just, I mean, talking to them because I know them pretty well. I come from their same kind of theological system and background, and hoping more people with the same training that I have can talk to them, and not just to trip them up, but I feel like I know the questions to ask them to expose some of the stuff that I think people should be pressing onto, and have some of the categories and distinctions. And so I've talked to Doug directly. We confronted him at his own event, and I have him on record agreeing to do a one-on-one with me. And that's something we're going to be pressing into more. At least I'm going to be pressing into more. Is I want to talk to him directly and hopefully show people like, hey, this is how you talk to people like this. This is how you engage in these discussions. And telling these communities, as much as it's going to grate against you, forming relationships with them. I know that sounds really tough. That sounds not fun, and it could be really triggering for a lot of people. And for those that it is too much, then like you can leave that alone and not do that until you're either healthy or just kind of keep it for other people who are prepared for this. But it's keeping conversations with them. It's being humans with them. It's humanizing them because they can kind of seem like deities in some sense. They're untouchable. They have all this power. But that's at least what we're planning on doing, and then hopefully replicating what we've done in Moscow more times in Moscow, and in some of the hot spots, and utilizing some of the knowledge and hopefully some reporter connections to maybe do this on a bigger level. But that's at least where I think that starts. But I'll let Sarah, as the professional in the group,
Mhm. Well,
describe this
and
better.
like Sons of Patriarchy, Peter's been kind enough to invite me on, but that is like his thing and Sarah Vader, where
Yeah.
I'm like out here or freelance reporter. Um, I'm on deadline today with a story. I have a book due at the beginning of September trying to make sense of what has happened to the church in America and how that's affecting our politics, how that could affect all of us in the future. I just keep writing. It will say, I've had opportunity is a weird word, but I think it fits. The the opportunity to be trusted by survivors of many, many communities. Moscow holds a special place for me. When the very story broke, there have been bits and pieces and whispers and blogs, but that for many of these women in that story, this was the first time that they were, staking their neck out. They did it together, and it felt like a group of people just holding hands and jumping, and we didn't know where the bottom would be. And they were willing to do that. Not for me, not that charming, but they did that because they wanted to help other people. They wanted to put a warning out there for the country, for the world. And that's why when I was asked to come out there, and safety's always a concern. Like there were things we talked about, but I have a lot of trouble saying no to the people of Moscow because I've seen how brave they can be in spite of what they've experienced, and their willingness to step out there kind of makes it impossible not to link hands with them.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate both of you in the work that you've been doing, not only in exposing what these people are doing, but also providing a liberating presence in and among those who Wilson and his men would consider the least of these. And so I appreciate that. And I appreciate you guys coming on and sharing about your experiences.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rick.
That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite podcast platform. And we'll be back with another episode on Monday.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State. Be sure to follow BNG daily at baptistnews.com and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. BNG is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at baptistnews.com.
This episode was produced and edited by Mac Bowles of TKG Communications, LLC, Dallas, Texas.